October 2016, I was working the Halloween season at Party City. It seemed like a great time. Costumes, decorations, and excited chaos filled the air as people prepared for one of the most fun holidays of the year. I even volunteered for the night shift in October, thinking it would be quieter after dark. I imagined myself stocking shelves and organizing costumes with only a few last-minute shoppers to help. What I didn't expect was for that shift to turn into something straight out of a horror movie. It was a week before Halloween, and the store was buzzing with customers, rushing to grab costumes. The chaos didn't settle down until about an hour before closing. That night, I was working with Sarah and Josh, along with a few others, handling the front of the store. My job was to manage the back stock, which meant frequent trips to the basement to grab extra costumes and decorations to restock the shelves. The basement at Party City wasn't anything special, just a large, damp room filled with old racks, boxes, and leftover Halloween decorations from the previous year. It was a bit creepy, but I tried to tell myself it gave the place character. The shift was going smoothly until around 9 p.m., when I made my third or fourth trip down to the basement. I was grabbing boxes of fake cobwebs and plastic spiders when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe the way the light hit one of the Halloween decorations. But when I looked directly at it, my stomach dropped. Someone was standing at the far end of the basement, near the old storage racks. The figure wore a long white hooded robe and a mask that covered their entire face. The mask was smooth and featureless, just a blank white face staring back at me. I immediately thought it was Josh playing a prank. He was known for messing around, especially during Halloween. "Nice try, Josh. You're not scaring me," I called out. There was no response. The figure remained still, staring at me. I laughed, thinking he was committed to the joke. I grabbed my boxes and started walking toward the stairs, glancing back at the figure every few steps. It hadn't moved. Something felt off. The robe wasn't one of ours, and the mask, it wasn't one of the cheap plastic ones we sold. It looked too detailed, too real. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped and turned fully toward the figure. "Okay, seriously, Josh, it's late. Let's not do this. Let's not do this." Still nothing, just silence. I was getting annoyed now. I set the boxes down and took a step toward the figure, ready to pull off the mask and end the joke. But as soon as I moved, the figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing behind the storage racks. I froze. If it were Josh, he would have said something by now, or at least laughed. But there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustling of the robe, just silence. "Josh!" I called out again, but my voice sounded shaky now. I walked slowly toward the spot where the figure had vanished. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I peered around the corner of the storage rack, fully expecting to see Josh crouched down, ready to spook me. But there was no one, just dusty old boxes and leftover Halloween decorations. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe Josh had slipped out when I wasn't looking, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned to head back to the stairs. Then the figure was back. This time, it stood much closer, in the same spot near the old storage racks. It hadn't made a sound. No footsteps, no rustling of the robe, just silence. My mouth went dry. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Still no answer. I backed toward the stairs, my eyes locked on the figure. With every step, I expected it to rush at me, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching. At least I assumed it was watching. The mask made it impossible to tell if there were eyes behind it. When I reached the stairs, I grabbed the handrail and bolted up 2 steps at a time, slamming the door shut behind me, and I just wanted to get back to the front of the store where the lights were brighter and other people were around. Sarah was behind the counter, restocking candy. "You okay?" she asked, noticing my panicked expression. "Did anyone go down to the basement?" "No," I blurted out, my voice more frantic than I wanted it to be. "Why?" I opened my mouth to explain, but I didn't even know where to start. Telling her about a hooded figure in a mask standing silently in the basement sounded insane, even to me. "Never mind," I muttered, brushing it off. "It's probably just Josh messing around." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Josh left an hour ago." My heart sank. I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. If Josh wasn't in the basement, then who, or what, had I seen? Before I could say anything else, a faint creak echoed from the basement door. Both Sarah and I turned toward the stairwell. The door, the one I had slammed shut, was now slightly ajar. "I locked that," I whispered, more to myself than to Sarah. Her eyes widened. She took a step back, reaching for her phone. What the hell is going on? The basement door creaked open a little wider. Then we saw it. The figure stood halfway up the stairs, its mask, its face, I still couldn't tell which, glowing slightly in the dim light. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching us, silent, unmoving. I grabbed Sarah's arm. "Call the cops," I whispered. She nodded, fumbling with her phone. But before she could dial, the figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the basement again. The door creaked shut behind it. We stood there, stunned, not knowing what to do next. Finally, our manager Greg arrived. We told him what happened, but he just laughed it off, saying it was probably teenagers trying to scare us. But Sarah and I knew better. This wasn't a prank. Something, or someone, was down there that shouldn't have been. Greg eventually called the police, just to be safe. 2 officers showed up and checked the basement, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there. They wrote it off as a Halloween prank gone too far. I quit the next day. Sarah lasted another week before she left too. Neither of us wanted to stick around to see what else might happen. I still don't know who or what I saw in that basement, but I'll never forget the way it watched us without ever making a sound. And every October, when the air starts to get colder and the Halloween decorations go up, I can't help but think about that night, about the figure in the white robe, and how it never made a sound. Growing up in a small town, there wasn't much to do, especially once the weather turned cold. But every October, a massive pile of leaves would magically appear in old Mr. Keller's front yard. It became the center of our fall afternoons. That pile, made of crisp, fallen leaves from the giant maples that lined the street, was our playground. As long as we didn't ruin the rest of his yard, old Keller never said a word. Sometimes, we'd see him just standing in the window, watching us silently from behind those dusty curtains. At the time, it didn't seem strange at all. There were 4 of us who practically lived in that pile. Me, Tommy, Ryan, and Jess. We weren't little kids anymore. We were in middle school. But there was something about that leaf pail that brought us back to simpler times. After all, in our small town, the simple things were the best things. And nothing seemed like it could ruin that. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the air had a bite to it, the way it always does when fall creeps closer to winter. We had just finished a game of street football, and our jerseys were sticking to us with sweat. There it was, the giant mound of leaves just waiting for us to dive in. Mr. Keller must have raked all morning to get it that big. It stood taller than some of us, like a colorful mountain of autumn. "Last one in's a loser!" Tommy yelled, already sprinting toward the pile. Without thinking, we all took off running full speed into the leaves. The pile exploded in every direction, leaves raining down like confetti. We dove in, tossing handfuls at each other, laughing until we couldn't breathe. It was like being little kids again, rolling around without a care in the world. We buried each other in the leaves, disappearing under the colorful blanket, then leaping out like monsters, roaring and tackling one another. This went on for nearly an hour, until we were completely exhausted. As the sun began to set, the laughter died down, and we lay in the leaves, catching our breath. It was the kind of peaceful, quiet moment that only comes after hours of carefree fun. That was when I first noticed it, a soft rustling sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized it wasn't coming from the trees, it was coming from the pile. I sat up and looked around. Jess was lying back, staring up at the sky with her arms outstretched. Tommy was poking Ryan with a stick, trying to start another fight. "You hear that?" I asked, looking at Jess. "Hear what?" she asked, confused. "Out noise." I pointed toward the pile of leaves, like something's moving in there. Tommy chuckled. "It's probably just a squirrel or something. Stop freaking out." I wasn't convinced. The rustling was getting louder, and it was definitely coming from the pile, right from the center. Jess squinted at the leaves, concerned. "Yeah, I hear it too now." Ryan stood up. "Dude, it's just leaves. You're being paranoid." But the rustling didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. Then, to my horror, the pile actually moved. It wasn't a small shift, like when a breeze catches the edge of it. No, this was more like something underneath was trying to push up through the leaves. The mound of color shifted and swayed, like it was fantastic Bose's blunders. The mound of color shifted and swayed, like it was breathing. My stomach clenched, and my mind immediately raced to the worst possible conclusion. "Okay, what the hell?" Tommy finally muttered, standing up. Ryan still looked unconvinced, but even he took a step back, keeping his eyes locked on the pile. "I'm telling you, there's something in there," I said, stepping backward away from the rustling leaves. Jess had already moved behind me. Tommy walked over to the pile and nudged it with his foot. Nothing happened at first, just a little flutter of leaves as they settled back down. But then the pile erupted. Leaves scattered in all directions as something burst out from underneath. We screamed, all four of us. A man stood there, hunched over. His clothes were filthy and torn. His hair was matted with leaves, and his face was smeared with dirt. His eyes were wide and wild, darting between us as if he wasn't sure what he was seeing, or maybe he didn't care. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was like we were frozen in place, staring at this thing that had just emerged from our leaf pile. Then the man spoke. "I've been watching you." That's when I ran. I didn't stop to think. I didn't even look back. I just ran, sprinting down the street. I could hear Jess's footsteps right behind me. Tommy stayed. I heard him shout something, his voice full of anger. "What the hell are you doing?" he yelled. But I didn't dare turn around. Ryan was the next to run, and by the time we reached the end of the block, he was right behind us. Jess was sobbing, clutching her sides, and I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. We huddled together, catching our breath. too afraid to say anything. Finally, I mustered up the courage to look back at Keller's yard. Tommy was still there, standing in the leaves, face to face with the man. "What's he doing?" Ryan whispered. I shook my head. "I don't know, he's just talking to him." "Talking? We have to get him out of there." But before any of us could move, the man took a step closer to Tommy, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in Tommy's body, the way his fists clenched at his sides. Then, without warning, the man laughed. He straightened up and turned his back on Tommy, walking slowly toward the edge of the yard. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything was over, that this nightmare was just some twisted prank. But then, just as the man reached the bushes at the edge of Keller's yard, he stopped. He turned around, his eyes locking onto us from across the street. "I'll be seeing you." With that, he disappeared into the bushes, leaving the four of us standing there, trembling and confused. Tommy walked over to us. "He's gone," he said simply. "What did he say to you?" Jess asked, her voice shaky. Tommy shrugged, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the man had disappeared. "Nothing important. He's just some weirdo." But there was something in Tommy's voice, something that made me think he wasn't telling us the whole truth. I didn't push it, though. None of us did. We were just glad to be away from that man. We spent the rest of the afternoon at my house, trying to make sense of what had happened. Ryan suggested we call the cops, but Tommy shot that down immediately. "What are we going to tell them? That a crazy guy popped out of a leaf pile? They'll laugh us off the phone." Jess nodded, still shaken. "I just want to forget about it." So, that's what we did. We didn't talk about it again, not for the rest of the weekend, and not in the weeks that followed. But something had changed after that day. We stopped playing in the leaves. We stopped going near Keller's yard altogether. We found other things to do, other places to hang out. But every time I walked past Mr. Keller's house, I couldn't help but look at the pile of leaves, thinking I'd see that man again, hiding beneath the surface, waiting. He never came back, not that we saw anyway. Who was he? Why was he there? And, most importantly, what was he planning to do? The memory of that day still haunts me, even now. I left the party later than planned. It was one of those Halloween gatherings where everyone was supposed to dress up, eat candy, and maybe have a few drinks. I didn't put much effort into my costume, just a black hoodie and some face paint, calling it a night. It wasn't really my scene, but I had promised a friend I'd show up. That promise kept me there long enough to see most of the guests leave. By 1 a.m., I decided I'd had enough. It had been raining on and off all night, and by the time I stepped outside, the drizzle had turned into a steady downpour. My car was parked a couple of blocks away, so I jogged down the slick pavement. The road was quiet. Too quiet for Halloween? No trick-or-treaters, no late-night walkers, just me and the sound of my sneakers splashing through puddles. When I got to my car, I sat there for a moment, letting the sound of rain against the windshield calm me. It felt good to be alone, away from the noise and costumes. The thought of my warm bed was the only thing keeping me going at that point. I turned on the engine, flipped the windshield wipers on, and pulled out onto the empty road. It was a long drive home, and the rain made it harder to see, even with the wipers working overtime. I was about 15 minutes from home when I saw her. At first, she was just a faint figure on the side of the road, barely visible through the rain. My headlights caught the edge of something, so I slowed down, squinting through the water-smeared windshield. There she was. A girl walking along the side of the road, no umbrella, soaked to the bone. She wasn't dressed for the weather at all. A light, pale dress clung to her body, and her long, dark hair hung in wet strands over her face. It wasn't just her presence in the middle of nowhere during a rainstorm that made me uneasy. It was the way she moved, slowly, as if she wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. Instinctively, I pulled over. I lowered my window just a crack, enough for my voice to get out. "Hey, are you all right?" She stopped and turned towards me. Her face was shadowed by the rain and the angle of the headlights, but I saw her hesitate. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound reassuring. The rain was coming down harder, and leaving her out there didn't feel right. There was a long pause before she nodded. I unlocked the door, and she slipped into the passenger seat without a word. The smell of rain filled the car as she sat down, dripping water onto the seat. I glanced at her out of the corner of my eye. She stared straight ahead, hands resting in her lap, fingers pale and slender. "Where are you headed?" I asked, as I pulled back onto the road. She was silent for a moment, almost like she hadn't heard me. Then, in a voice so soft I could barely hear her, she said, "Just up the road." Her answer didn't feel right, but I kept driving. "All right, I'll drop you off wherever you need." We drove in silence after that. I kept sneaking glances at her, trying to make sense of her. The dim light in the car didn't help, but something about her presence felt unsettling. Her dress was too light for the weather, her hair was a tangled wet mess, and she barely moved. Her head tilted slightly downward, as if lost in thought. After a few minutes, I broke the silence again. "Were you coming from a party or something? I didn't expect to see anyone walking around here this late." She didn't respond right away. When she did, it felt like she wasn't really answering the question. I've been walking for a while, and I've been... That was it, nothing more. A knot tightened in my stomach. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. I decided to drop the conversation. If she wanted to stay quiet, I wasn't going to push her. We drove for a few more minutes, and the rain got worse. My headlights barely cut through the downpour now, and the road felt even more isolated. No houses, no signs, just dark trees pressing in from both sides. "Is it much farther?" I asked, trying to shake the growing unease gnawing at me. She lifted her head slightly, finally turning to look at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide but distant, like she was looking through me rather than at me. "Just keep going," she whispered. The rain beat down harder and I could barely see the road ahead. I flicked on the high beams hoping for better visibility, and then I saw it. Up ahead at the end of the road was a cemetery. The sight of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't driven this way in years and had forgotten about it entirely. But there it was, the old cemetery, its rusted gate barely visible through the rain. My skin prickled. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. I slowed the car to a stop just outside the gate. I turned to her, unsure of what to say. "Are you visiting someone here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the door handle and stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the downpour before I could react. I watched her walk toward the gate, her figure dissolving into the mist and rain until she was completely gone. For a moment, I just sat there, staring after her, wondering if I should follow. But something deep inside told me not to. Something whispered that I didn't want to know what she was doing out there, that I shouldn't get involved. After a long moment, I put the car in reverse, turned around, and drove away from the cemetery. The rain let up slightly as I went, and the unease began to fade. At least until I looked over at the passenger's seat. It was dry. Completely dry. I tried to make sense of it. There had been no trace of her, no wet seat, no water dripping onto the floor, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. I kept driving, my thoughts racing. Who was she? Why was she out there walking toward the cemetery in the middle of the night? And more importantly, was she even real? The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and empty. But deep in my mind, I knew something about that night wasn't right. And it would stay with me long after the rain stopped. I was living alone in a one-room micro house and facing my first Halloween alone. That in itself was weird, but it got even stranger when, a few days before the 31st, a girl from the neighborhood disappeared without a trace. No one had any idea why she left, but the cops suspected someone had kidnapped her, which set off alarm bells for everyone, especially the dads in town. They tried their best to make their kids feel safe to go trick-or-treating on Halloween. The news spread like wildfire, and the whole town trembled with fear, worried that the kidnapper might take advantage of Halloween to abduct more people, especially children. Despite my own nerves, I wasn't going to let that ruin my plans. I decided to stay home and hand out candy instead of going out. It was my first time doing this after years of being the kid who asked for candy. It's amazing how time flies. I was 19 years old now, all grown up, and it was my turn to give candy to the little sugar-hungry monsters knocking on my door. To my surprise, the streets were much more crowded than I expected, considering the situation. Many dads were taking their kids out for candy, and things felt safer than I had imagined. By about 10 p.m., most of the kids were going to bed, and things started to calm down. I turned off the lights and prepared to relax, watching a horror movie I had been looking forward to for ages. It was nearly 2 a.m. when I realized how late it was and decided to turn off the TV and go to bed. Suddenly, someone started banging on the door. The knock was loud and strange, making me jump. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to secure the door chain because something in the air told me I needed to be cautious. My intuition was right. As soon as I turned the handle, a guy I had never seen before in my life tried to force his way into my house. I had to use all my strength to close the door, but he hit me hard in the face, almost breaking my nose. Fortunately, the chain held, and I managed to keep him out. Seeing he couldn't get in, the guy leaned closer to look through the crack. What I saw then froze me. He was wearing a super realistic Leatherface mask. He stepped back, smiled at me, and said, "Happy Halloween," while holding a leather bag made of what looked like human skin. The same material as the mask, he acted as if he were joking or asking for candy, but given the recent disappearance, I wasn't amused. I forced a smile and said, "Hey, buddy, it's too late to be trick-or-treating. Don't you think it's time to go home?" "Oh, come on, don't be a party pooper," he replied. "Look how much effort I put into this costume. You have no idea how long it took me to make it and what I had to do to get the raw materials." The way he said that was deeply disturbing. "Sorry, but I already gave away all my candy," I told him, hoping he would leave. "Can't you check again? Maybe you missed something," he said sarcastically. At that moment, his tone shifted. He dropped the playful attitude and said in a low, sinister voice, "I'll enjoy making a scarf out of your face." A shiver ran down my spine. I told him, "Get off my property or I'll call the police." He chuckled and pointed to a bag of candy on the coffee table inside. "I can see candy right there." In a moment of weakness, I glanced over, which was a big mistake. The guy reached through the crack and grabbed me by the neck, trying to pull me out. I struggled, punching his arm to make him let go. We were both screaming, but thankfully the chain stayed tight. Finally, I managed to scream for help, which woke up the neighbors. I kept punching his arm, and when he loosened his grip, I bit him so hard I tasted blood. It worked. He let go. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, as neighbors came out with bats and knives to investigate the noise. The man ran off, dropping his bag in the process. When the cops arrived, they took my statement and collected the leather bag as evidence. That night, I tried to sleep, hoping to forget the ordeal. However, a few days later, the police informed me that the bag was made of human skin. Worse, the DNA tests revealed it matched the missing girl from my neighborhood. Everything clicked. That's why the guy looked familiar. I had seen that face on the news just before Halloween. The man was caught a couple of days later, and when they searched his house, they found the girl's body in a refrigerator in his basement. They also discovered the body of another young woman who had been missing for about a year. The town was in shock, but I was thankful to have survived that night. It could have ended much worse.